Hi there, my name is Robin, and welcome back to Only the Best Fantasy Novels. Today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite authors, Michael Moorcock, particularly his trilogy, The Chronicles of Count Brass. Now, that's a very misleading name for this trilogy, given that these are very much Hawkmoon novels. I would consider this the second trilogy following the second series, a trilogy following the first series, which was a quartet featuring Dorian Hawkmoon as this particular incarnation of the Eternal Champion. So yeah, the fact that this has very little to do with Congress, I really don't get why. I truly don't understand why it's called the Chronicles of Congress. But yeah, moving on. So, like I mentioned, it's a trilogy, and it's directly connected to the Hawkmoon novels, the quartet that's typically marketed as the history of the rune staff. In fact, the first book in this trilogy directly picks up off of the end of that series, where we see Hawkmoon dealing with the repercussions of the events in that series, in the way that series ended. And this is pretty much standard Michael Moorcock. We have the Eternal Champion doing best what he does, which is suffer. He eventually becomes embroiled in an adventure that provides him an opportunity to undo one of the key moments of the previous trilogy, the previous quartet. And in keeping with the overall theme of the entire Eternal Champion saga of balance, we see that once he takes advantage of this opportunity to change something that occurred, it has a pretty big ramification, which isn't revealed until the very end of this book, which means it ends in a pretty big cliffhanger. Which, yeah, it makes for a very fun read. This book is it feels very much like a middle book. Yeah, it contains like a self-contained story, whatever, but I don't see you easily following this book unless you've read the History of the Rune Staff by Hawkmoon. The History of the Rune Staff series. I don't see you fully appreciating it at minimum. It's pretty much on par for the course with what we expect from Moorcock for like a middle story. It does set up the remaining two books to an extent, because now we know what's at stake, we know who are the players in this particular saga, that kind of thing. Pretty standard stuff. A middle book with a big hook to keep you reading. The second book in the trilogy is The Champion of Garthorpe, and that deals with the fallout of the first. And we find Hawkmoon in a pretty bad place, mentally and consequentially physically. But he does get a call to arms from a friend of Congras's that results in a pretty unusual adventure. Moorcock is a very imaginative writer. He's one of the writers in the class of fantasy authors who feel that Tolkien did more harm than good to fantasy as a genre, and he puts that on display in his novels. He's very. This book is is very much a display of that. We get a new incarnation of the Eternal Champion, and this particular incarnation is introduced in such a unique and unforgettable way that I highly doubt it's been done in any of the other novels in this series, in the Eternal Champion saga. I haven't read them all. I've read quite a few, but not all. I highly doubt there's another intro that can compete with the intro in this one. So yeah, this is very much a Moorcock novel that will stick in your mind after you read it. It most importantly, it takes the trilogy as a whole in a new direction, because aside from being this can be read very much as a standalone novel compared to the first in the trilogy. It also provides leads and sets up the final book in the series. So for me, like this was a pretty fun, a pretty unexpected entry into a trilogy. And on hindsight, it should have been a testament to what Michael Moorcock had planned for the final book in this trilogy, which is the quest for Tanalorn. Now, having read this entire trilogy, I will say this: if you are a new reader to Michael Moorcock and you are thinking of checking out his and you've read a little bit, maybe you've started with the Elric books, which is the most common entry point, I would say after having read this book that you need to leave the Hawkmoon series for the very last, or you should leave them for the very last. You should read pretty much everything else that you think you're interested in and leave Hawkmoon for last, because I didn't read any. It's like I try to avoid reading anything about a book before I walk into it, just so like I can have like a blank slate, form my own opinions, have my own thoughts, and I was not ready. I was not ready for this book, The Quest for Tanalorn, and the final novel of the 7 Hawkmoon novels. Long story short, read Hawkmoon last. Leave the Hawkmoon novels to read last. I don't want to discuss what happens. I do think that it was pretty wild. I was in no way, shape, or form ready, or even possibly expected what was going to happened. But now, having been through this, I can say leave the Hawkmoon novels for last. Overall, I would say that this particular trilogy is a definitive one in the Eternal Champion saga. It will need to be read if you're a fan of Moorcock and his multiverse. You do need to read this trilogy at some point. It should be the last series that you read, because what it does, trying really hard to avoid spoilers here. What it does in a very unexpected and very definitive fashion. But yeah, definitely worth the read. Absolutely essential to read if you're a Moorcock fan, if you're a fan of the Eternal Champion novels. And it's going to stick with me for a very, very long time, because what happens is pretty unforgettable. I wasn't ready. But yeah, overall, excellent series. Still complete. At the end of it, I'm still completely confused why this is called The Chronicles of Conbrass. We'll just go with it. I consider this Hawkmoon 5 to 7. With the History of the Runestaff novels being 1 to 4. But yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on the Hawkmoon / Conbrass novels. Have you read these? Were you prepared for how this ended? Drop something in the comments. Let me know what you think, and if you've made it this far, thank you very much.